Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Mr. President, members of Congress, fellow astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. That the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. That the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. So I'll be brief. Students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen. And that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen. So in the future, if we want to keep doing something, we need to know why.
Go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
All recorded on these telemetry tapes. So where is this hard evidence?
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
Could this be true? Mankind's first interplanetary exploration and the original science data is missing?
11, this is Houston, radio check, over.
If it's anywhere, it should be here at NASA's Goddard Space Center in Maryland, home to the National Space Science Data Archives.
This film you're making now, what is it?
This is a film trying to prove that Apollo 11 happened.
Does it have a name? I mean, do you have a name for it yet,
I think you're calling it "Did We Go?"
Did we go? Okay.
Doesn't have it either. The Smithsonian doesn't have it. Johnson doesn't have it.
Right. We've been unable to track it down. I mean, we don't know where this telemetry data ended up, and we don't know what path it may have taken. So, unfortunately, I'm afraid I can't really give you much of a clue as to where this data ended up and whether it still exists or not.
In 2002, Blue Marble 2.0, NASA's Rob Simon made this. And it had wide appeal too. For example, it ended up as the default background on the iPhone.
I didn't even know until I bought an iPhone and turned it on and kind of did a little happy dance.
Simon's job is...
It's primarily taking data and making pictures out of it.
That's what this is, a composite of data sets from several different instruments translated into a picture.
To us, the really cool thing was the data set. Up until that point, there was no realistic color map of the globe anywhere.
So the land layer here comes from
the Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer aboard Terra.
And the tricky part here was the weather.
So we actually had to take clouds out.
They stashed the clouds for later, went onto the ocean. That came from an instrument that measures phytoplankton in the sea.
Where it was low, I colored it dark blue because they're low mostly in mid-oceans. And then where it was a little bit higher, it was like a little bit brighter green.
Then add the clouds back in.
There's a small problem with it because there's a very slight gap in between each orbit.
So some of those are painted on.
It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. There's a small problem with it because there's a very slight gap in between each orbit.
So some of those are painted on.
It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
Then
there was another layer to sort of simulate the atmosphere.
And then there's this little bright spot.
It's called the specular highlight. So it's the reflection of sunlight off of water.
Those are the pieces, but you can't just slap them all together.
It just didn't look realistic. It looks kind of flat, or the clouds are sort of too see-through. So I just hit Command Z a lot.
There's artistry to creating the world.
What I imagine it to be. Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. I've never been to space.
Is a crisis in cosmology. Usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say something's wrong with the theory. We're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it. This is the largest mismatch between theory and experience.
This new proof of the flat Earth comes from Grota 1 from a frozen lake in Manitoba, Canada. I strongly encourage everyone to head over to his channel and subscribe to show your support, because he obviously went to a lot of effort for truth here. For this curvature test, Grota 1 essentially set 4 lights at around 1 foot above the water and ice. He set up his camera at about 8 miles away from the furthest light and 5 miles away from the closest light. The lights were spread out at about a mile apart. At each location, Grota 1 drilled down to the water just to confirm that he wasn't on some irregular ice formation, and to also ensure that his test was on a level surface. The furthest light from the camera was the red light at 8 miles from the camera. The blue light was at about 7 miles, the yellow was at 6 miles, and the orange light was the closest one at 5 miles away from the camera. You should definitely watch his video where he goes into much more detail, but here he is sitting in his truck at a distance of 8 miles from the red light. Notice that the lights are all on the same flat plane. There is no Earth bulge and no physical globe horizon. Next, Grota 1 lowered his camera to only 12 7/8 inches above the surface. At that small elevation, the globe horizon would have to be closer than 1.27 miles And the furthest light, the red one, should have been 29 feet below the horizon. That's taking into account the 1 foot height of the light. Notice how the lights are all on the same flat plane. There's absolutely no supposed bulge here. And if there is no curvature on that frozen lake, then there is no Earth curvature anywhere. Look at the red light. That light should be 29 feet below the horizon. Finally, Grota 1 brought his camera down even lower to just 5 7/8 inches off of the ice. At this very low elevation, the red light would have to be a whopping 33 feet below the horizon. That's 34 feet minus the 1 foot height of the laser. Without question, the globe fails again. Furthermore, under the official model, the globe horizon would have to be closer than a mere 0.86 miles. There is no globe physical curve here, blocking your view. As Grota 1 demonstrated on this frozen lake, regardless of the conditions, the Earth is observably, testably, repeatedly, and measurably flat.
Even talking, I believe that anyone can answer big questions for themselves.
The best experiments are incredibly simple, but point us to profound truth.
A video on something called a faux pendulum. You also hear it called a Foucault pendulum. These are pendulums that are supposed to demonstrate the spin of the Earth, but not everyone realizes that they actually have a magnetic drive plugged into electricity that keeps them moving. So I guess the magnet drive system is what I guess keeps it spinning in the proper pattern or whatever.
Actually, the pattern is by the Earth's rotation.
Okay.
The magnetic drive keeps it swinging back and forth the full distance.
Gotcha.
So there's actually up in the ceiling there's a 3 foot high cone that has a circular magnet. The cable swings in the center of that. Hanging on the cable is a steel donut.
Okay.
So when the cable hits dead center, it breaks the photo beam, turning on the electric magnet. Then it pulls or draws the steel donut on the cable towards the ring. It times out, and then it goes over again. So it only turns on and off for a couple of seconds. So what that does, it keeps the pendulum swinging. When you have that much weight swinging back and forth in motion, it'll stay in the same plane in space.
Okay.
But the world rotates underneath it. That's a physics demonstration.
So I'm assuming maybe the first one didn't have, the little magnetic drive deal on it.
Actually it did. They had the magnetic ring. They just the amplifier used to use tubes, and instead of photo beams, they used to actually have a magnet on the center of the ground, and then they had a magnetic ring up on the tower. And then they ran a wire from the pit all the way up to the ceiling. So once and put a magnet on the tip of the ball. So when two magnets crossed over each other, it sent a signal to turn on the power. But it was very crude and it wasn't quite accurate, and they had to be adjusted quite often. It wasn't quite accurate, and they had to be adjusted quite often.
Sure.
Okay, so that's 6 hours. No movement whatsoever.